Today is Earth Day. This year's theme is focusing on renewable energy and climate action. An increasing number of countries are calling for protections of our air, water, and wildlife from industrial pollution and harmful greenhouse gases. Interesting to bring that up because when you say many countries around the world are doing it, it seems like we're going in the other direction here in the United States, becoming less so interested in that. So Earth Day is a good day to talk about that and what it means to each of us. Our 9 News medical expert, Dr. Kohli, is with us now. So air pollution, we know it's bad, it's not good for us, but we're starting to get a better idea of the impact it's having on our health.
Even me as a physician, I feel like I'm only now starting to appreciate that impact. And, you know, we can't really be healthy, Tom and Kim, until we live on a planet that's healthy, because it's all the environment around us. And so if you think about air pollution, it's responsible for 7 million preventable deaths every year.
Wow.
And it shortens your life expectancy by about 2 to 3 years if you live in a city that has a high level of air pollution. And these are tiny little particulate matters that get into our lungs, get into our bloodstream, cause cancer, inflammation, lung disease, strokes, heart attacks, and we're getting more and more exposure to them every day.
Sometimes you think of air pollution as what you can see. You see smog, but it's not always what you see.
No. It's not always what you see. In fact, some of these particles are so small, they're sort of a little dust, a speck of dust, or perhaps even smaller. And that's the reason they so efficiently dissolve into our bloodstream. Because when we inhale them, obviously they affect our nose, our eyes, our throat, but they actually get into the lungs and then can make its way to the bloodstream, where it can get into the brain, it can get into our organs, get into our blood vessels.
So, I mean, I don't know, does it matter to stay inside? But that's a lousy thing to tell people in a state like ours where people love to get outside. And being outside and running, exercising is good for your health.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The newest research is showing that being inside doesn't offer that much protection as we thought, because it gets in through the air vents and what have you. And in fact, even buildings can create pollution. And that's the other thing for us to think about as cities are getting bigger and bigger, is particulate matters from buildings can also create pollution. And sometimes inside is less ventilated, so you're actually concentrating that air pollution. So we really don't have great mitigation strategies for the air pollution aside from just reducing the amount of pollution that we're creating, which comes from fossil fuels. Of course, if you're someone who's high risk with chronic diseases, I would advise my patients to move away from an urban environment to something more suburban or even rural where there's less air pollution.
But then we talk about wildfires. How often do we tell people, warn people there's wildfires in another state and how bad it is here in Colorado, or it's our own wildfire?
And a lot of that is driven by the climate change, right? These hot, dry climates that are producing a different kind of pollution, which is from the wildfires.
I want to ask you about noise pollution, because that's different, and I don't think people are as aware of it. You know, when you're standing next to a jet engine, or when Jamal Murray hits a three-pointer and you're, in the middle of a tight ball game. But I think many people wear watches now that tell them that you are now in a loud situation, like even if you're not at a concert, it tells you you're in a dangerous area.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting about noise pollution. It's the second greatest threat to our health in terms of our environment after air pollution. And it's something, like you said, we don't often think about. We do think about it, we think about our hearing, but even more so than our hearing, noise pollution is responsible for thousands of new cases of heart disease every year. Because if you think about what happens when you have noise pollution, all this city noise, excess noise, it does two things. One is it disrupts your sleep, right? So that's when you're restoring all your cell damage and what have you, reducing the inflammation. But the second, it triggers this fight or flight response. And the data tells us that if you're more sensitive to noises, like I'm a very sensitive sleeper, I'm just sensitive to noise, your actually fight or flight is more heightened. But even those people who can tune out the noise, you look in their brain, you do an MRI of their brain, their fear center gets triggered when there's a lot of excess noise around them, such as in a city environment.
So you're spending a lot of that type of brain or heart energy. Your fight or flight instincts are costly.
They're triggered by the noise and they're on all day, and they're not supposed to be on all day because they're triggering inflammation and heart disease and strokes and thrombosis and spasm of the blood vessels and high blood pressure. So we think the mechanism of noise pollution is real, and the problem is we haven't really researched from a scientific perspective since the 1980s because it's not something we're even recognizing as a threat. So I'm really glad we're talking about it, and if you're somebody who's sensitive to noise, I think you should bring it up to your doctor because it's a cardiovascular risk factor.
So get on top of a nice quiet mountain and just stay there.
Or you turn your white noise up really loud, which I know there's talk about that too. Okay. All right, Dr. Kohli, so much more to discuss next time. We can find more from Dr. Kohli at 9news.com/Dr. Kohli.